So, swim rules and open water. So, some key things to remember about the swim course. Athletes may use any stroke to propel themselves. So that can be front crawl, breaststroke, backstroke if they want. They're also allowed to tread water or float. And they're also allowed to push off the ground at the beginning and at the end of every swim lap. So if you have a shallow start, obviously this is the typical example for that. And they can push off. They must follow the prescribed swim course. So what's important when the course is being designed is that you try not to have too many hard right angles. And you try and position, officials or safety crew in and around the swim buoys to monitor behaviour and people cutting the course, because that's likely where people will cut courses short, and particularly long distance courses as well. Athletes can often swim in the wrong side of the buoy. So these are the sort of things that you need to be planning for along with the race organizer. Athletes may stand at the bottom. They may rest by holding inanimate objects, such as a buoy or a stationary boat. Because obviously, safety is key, and you don't unnecessarily want to stress people out if, for example, they get a bit panicky or there's perhaps a little bit of a current. So they can hold an inanimate object such as a buoy or a stationary boat. In an emergency, an athlete should raise their arm overhead and call for assistance. Once the official assistance is rendered, the athlete must retire from the competition. So this is an important thing. If they get any sort of outside help, they are automatically disqualified. And they need to be told that. What's also important when assistance has been rendered, that the last thing that should be going into render assistance should be a motorboat. First responders should be canoeists or lifeguards on surfboards, something like that. So getting people out of the water, the first responders shouldn't be in a motor, because obviously it could be a lot of people around. Athletes may sportingly maintain their own space in the water. Now, there's always a little bit of argy-bargy in the water, but there's the standard argy-bargy, and then there's the bad behaviour and poor behaviour. So any officials on the water can use video equipment to monitor behaviour as they're following the athletes, and this is can be used then for penalties later on. And the ITU water qualities rules must be adhered to. Now, this is something that will be covered in a later course, but obviously water quality is very important. E. coli, streptococcus, there's guidelines around the level of bacteria allowed in the water, and you can get this information from the local environmental health agency. And if you're a technical delegate, this is something that you will be requesting to get, or you should be requesting to get in advance of approving any race. So, water temperature. The table of water temperatures and distances you see here is taken from the Irish or the Triathlon Ireland derogations list from the ITU. Now, for some countries, like Ireland, where the water is always cold, if we were to use or adopt the ITU rules for water temperature, we'd never have an open water triathlon in this country. So each national federation is allowed to get derogations based on their own local situation. And this is Ireland's one that you see here. And the main difference is the fact that we can reduce the water temperature that we allow athletes into down to 11 degrees. Now, that's not the case elsewhere. But anything below 11 degrees is cancelled. It's simple as that. It's far too cold. And the key thing is, it's not so much the water temperature is the problem, it's the air temperature. And particularly with events in early season, such as May or even late season in September, air temperature can be a bigger problem than water temperature. And there is a chart in the ITU rules which shows the impact air temperature has on the body and the water temperature. So this is something you need to be aware of. Generally speaking, if you have temperatures above 11 degrees, then it's okay. But you'll notice that depending on how cold it is, there is a maximum limit to the amount of time an athlete can be in the water, and also how long they can swim. So for example, if it is between 11 and 12 degrees, the maximum we can allow people in the water is 750 meters, irrespective of how long the course is. And this can be a difficult decision to make for a technical delegate with a race organizer who, might be really disappointed that their course has been cut short. And, there'll always be athletes who complain about this. But this is pure and simply safety, and this is an important slide to remember and to have at your disposal at any race, because it does happen a lot more than we might think. So to recap, you need to be familiar with Section 4 of the ITU's rulebook about swimming conduct, and also be aware of Triathlon Ireland's derogation sheet for rule exceptions. You also have the responsibility to measure the water temperature 1 hour before race start. So, if the race is at 9 o'clock, you take the water temperature at 8. If the race starts at 7 in the morning, you need to take the water temperature at 6. The water temperature then needs to be displayed in registration. It should be displayed if possible in transition, and it needs to be announced at the briefing. It's really important that athletes are communicated to, because they may decide themselves, you know what, I'm not going to do this because of whatever reason. And finally, to remember, swimming does not occur in water below 11 degrees.
So in our series on checking water temperatures around the world, we have today arrived in Stockholm. Air temperature is 19.1, and now we're in the water. Looks like a chilly day in the waters of Stockholm Harbour.
15 degrees.
But the weather is spectacular and it looks very promising for the race weekend. Final water temperature was 14.9.
So, rule exemptions. As I said before, Triathlon Ireland does have a list of published rule exemptions, and these are updated regularly by the Triathlon Ireland Technical Committee. And if there's ever any unclarity or lack of clarity around a rule, TI or the technical committee or experienced technical officials or people you should go to ask for clarity. So, open water hazards. Obviously, the other big risk is with open water hazards. And one of the key things, that is important in any race safety plan, and it's certainly one of the first things I look for when I'm dealing with a race organizer, is who is responsible for the swim course. With the best will in the world, unless you are a water safety expert, with a lot of experience and qualifications around water safety, and if a race organizer doesn't have somebody with that level of experience, then I would seriously be questioning the race water safety plan. It's important you have key water safety personnel who are experienced, who understand the water and that water hazards, are responsible for helping put together the water safety plan. But there are common dangers that we should be looking for as technical officials. Colder than expected water. Sometimes, particularly in rivers and lakes, water temperature can be that little bit cooler than elsewhere. And where you take the water temperature can be very important. Sometimes, in particular, if you leave it to the race organisers to take the water temperature, they may decide to take it in a place they know the water to be particularly warm, because you will find in various parts of a lake or a river, water will be warmer at certain parts. Choppy water. Choppy water can be an indication of not just the current, but also which way the wind is blowing. The wind can have an impact on the weaker swimmers, particularly if combined with a current, makes it difficult to swim against. Currents are really, really important. There are guidelines around what is tolerable and acceptable within the speed of a current, and you should check the guidelines for this, because obviously if people can't swim against the current, well, then they're going to need to be rescued, and that will have an impact on your water safety personnel and their ability to cope with the race safely. Fog and mist, also really important. You should not be sending athletes out into a foggy lake or sea. Generally speaking, fog and mist will clear with temperature. This can be an issue with early morning starts, and a provision needs to be in place if, for example, there is no wind on the day of the race, with a potential for fog and mist. And again, water safety personnel should be aware of this. The RNLI and other water safety people will be aware of the threat of fog and mist, and then you need to consider building in a later start time. And of course, this is a knock-on impact with the guards, any road closures, opening and closing of other aspects of the event. So you need to consider that as a contingency. Too many other competitors. There is a guideline for the amount of people who can start a race or be in the water at any one time. This will be dictated to by the width of the river, if it's a river, the swim course itself and how tight it is, and the sea conditions. The other thing to factor in, and this is something that we'll look at later on, is that too many athletes at the swim will mean too many athletes on the bike, particularly at the start. So bike density becomes important because it affects drafting and people's ability to get out of the drafting zone. Lack of safety crew. I've mentioned already who is in charge of water safety, and it should not be a volunteer or some lad from the club or the locality who is a lifeguard. It definitely needs to be somebody with significant water safety experience. If you've got canoeists, they should be safety trained, and if you've got lifeguards, obviously they're water safety trained, but if anyone operating a boat needs to have water safety experience. So it's really, really important you have that. That's a red flag if those personnel don't exist. Underwater obstructions. This can be the hardest one to find, but generally speaking, where this becomes an issue is at swim start, if you have lots of rocks and potentially broken glass. So checking that the water start is clear of any major obstructions is important. And water exit as well, because this is where people can get cuts, and having good having good first aid close to the swim exit and swim start for the start of the race is really important, particularly if it's a shaly, stony start. Jellyfish. Don't need to remind people that particularly in late summer, August, we are prone to getting lots of jellyfish. Man o' war can come up, particularly in the August. It is really sore if you get stung by this jellyfish, and unpleasant. And this is something that needs to be factored in to the swim plan and in contingency, and obviously warnings around jellyfish should be adhered to.